In 1974, residents of Jack Cassidy's neighborhood witnessed a scene so strange that it seemed impossible to connect it with the polished Broadway star they thought they knew. Cassidy walked outside completely naked and casually began watering his lawn, seemingly unaware, or unconcerned, that anyone could see him. It was more than an embarrassing celebrity incident. Something inside him was beginning to unravel, and the frightening episode offered only a glimpse of what was still to come. The consequences would be devastating, but even they could not compare with the horrifying fate waiting for Jack Cassidy just a few years later. Long before his private life descended into chaos, Cassidy had built an extraordinary reputation as an actor, singer, and director. On Broadway, he possessed the voice, confidence, and charisma of a man seemingly born for the stage. Away from the spotlight, however, his life was far less controlled. His unpredictable behavior, complicated relationships, and carefully guarded secrets often threatened to eclipse everything he accomplished professionally. He married twice, became the father of future teen idols, and cultivated the image of a glamorous show business family man. Yet there were parts of Jack Cassidy's life that even those closest to him did not fully understand, secrets that would remain buried until everything came crashing down. Jack was born John Joseph Edward Cassidy on March 5, 1927, in Richmond Hill, Queens, just a short distance from the Broadway world he would eventually conquer. He was the youngest of 5 children in a large Irish-German family, growing up surrounded by the noise, struggle, and constant motion of New York City. His father, William Cassidy, worked as an engineer for the Long Island Railroad, while his mother, Charlotte, had come to America from Hamburg, Germany. Together, they worked to provide stability for their children during an era when stability was anything but guaranteed. Cassidy's childhood was shaped by the hardships of the Depression. While other boys might have spent their afternoons playing games, Jack often found himself working. Money mattered, and everyone in the Cassidy household had to contribute. Those early years gave him an understanding of relentless work long before he ever experienced applause. Before Broadway audiences knew his name, Cassidy seemed willing to take almost any job that brought home a paycheck. His resume before show business was surprisingly extensive. He worked as a bellhop, dishwasher, counterman, chauffeur, postal clerk, hotel clerk, stable boy, and even a building salesman. None of those jobs offered glamour, but they taught him how badly he wanted something more. Deep down, Cassidy already knew that his future wasn't behind a counter or inside a hotel lobby. He wanted a stage. His first real doorway into entertainment appeared through an unlikely family connection. Cassidy had an uncle named Ben Dover, a former vaudeville performer and contortionist who recognized something special in the ambitious teenager. Dover helped arrange auditions and encouraged Jack to pursue performing seriously. By the time Cassidy reached 15, his interest in entertainment had become far stronger than his interest in school. Rather than continue along the conventional path, he made the risky decision to leave his education behind and chase a career in show business. Cassidy began studying with vocal coach Paul Robertson, developing the powerful baritone that would later become one of his trademarks. The training paid off remarkably quickly. At only 16 years old, he landed his first Broadway job in Cole Porter's Something for the Boys at the Alvin Theater. Cassidy wasn't a star yet, he was part of the chorus, but simply standing on a Broadway stage represented an enormous leap for a teenager from Queens. It was also the beginning of a connection to Cole Porter that would become much more intriguing years later. Porter was more than 3 decades older than Cassidy, and stories surrounding their relationship would eventually add another controversial chapter to Cassidy's already complicated private life. At the time, however, none of that was visible. Jack was simply a young performer desperate to climb higher. And climb he did. Throughout the 1940s, Cassidy steadily turned himself into a Broadway regular. He appeared in productions including Sadie Thompson in 1944, Around the World in 1946, and Music in My Heart in 1947. He wasn't yet the celebrated leading man he would become, but each production pushed him farther from his working-class childhood and closer to the glamorous world he had imagined. Then both his career and personal life changed at once. While appearing in The Firebrand of Florence, Cassidy met actress and dancer Evelyn Ward. Beautiful, talented, and equally comfortable under the theater lights, Ward immediately caught his attention. Their connection quickly extended beyond the stage. What began as professional chemistry developed into a romance, and on June 28, 1948, the two married in a ceremony surrounded by members of the theatrical world. For a time, Jack Cassidy seemed to have everything he had been chasing. He had a growing Broadway career, a glamorous wife, and soon, a family of his own. A few years after their marriage, the couple welcomed their son, David Bruce Cassidy. That child would eventually become a phenomenon in his own right, growing into one of America's most recognizable teen idols. But long before David's face appeared on bedroom walls across the country, his father was still fighting to establish himself as a major name. By the early 1950s, Jack's career was accelerating. His Broadway resume continued expanding, and in 1952 he joined the production of South Pacific at the Majestic Theater, taking on the role of Richard West. The teenager who had once washed dishes and worked hotel counters was now performing in one of Broadway's biggest productions. From the outside, it looked as though Jack Cassidy's gamble had paid off perfectly. He had escaped poverty, conquered Broadway, married a fellow performer, and started a family destined to become famous. But success was only making the contradictions inside him harder to hide. Behind the charm, the voice, and the carefully polished image was a man whose private struggles would eventually become impossible to contain. The bizarre behavior his neighbors witnessed in 1974 was still decades away, but the complicated forces that would drive Jack Cassidy toward that disturbing moment were already beginning to take shape. Jack Cassidy had already proven he belonged on Broadway, but now he was ready for something bigger than the chorus line. Later in 1952, he finally stepped into the spotlight with his first major leading role in Wish You Were Here at the Imperial Theater. Playing Chick Miller, Cassidy displayed the charm, confidence, and rich voice that would soon become his trademarks. The musical became a success, critics began paying closer attention, and suddenly the hard-working kid from Queens wasn't simply another Broadway performer. He was becoming one of the stage's most exciting young stars. Cassidy followed that breakthrough by taking on the role of Johnny O'Sullivan in Sandhog, a production centered on Irish immigrants working deep beneath New York City to construct its tunnels. For Cassidy, whose own background was rooted in an Irish-German working-class family, the material felt unusually personal. He brought an emotional authenticity to the role that audiences noticed, earning strong reviews and revealing a more serious side of his talent. Then, in 1955, Broadway temporarily gave way to an entirely different adventure. Cassidy joined a U.S. State Department-sponsored overseas tour of Oklahoma, playing the romantic lead, Curly. It was an opportunity to bring American musical theater to audiences far beyond New York, but the tour would ultimately transform Cassidy's life for reasons that had little to do with his performance. Among the cast was a beautiful young actress named Shirley Jones. Cassidy and Jones were supposed to be co-stars, nothing more. But somewhere between rehearsals, performances, and traveling through Europe together, professional chemistry became something much harder to ignore. On stage, they played romance. Off-stage, the feelings were becoming very real. There was only one major problem. Jack Cassidy was still married to Evelyn Ward. The marriage that had once seemed like a perfect Broadway romance was already under strain, and Cassidy's growing attachment to Jones pushed things toward the breaking point. As his relationship with his Oklahoma co-star deepened, Cassidy filed for divorce from Ward. One chapter of his personal life was ending just as another was beginning at astonishing speed. Cassidy had never been known for doing things quietly, and his proposal to Shirley Jones was no exception. During a 1956 production of The Beggar's Opera, Cassidy transformed an ordinary performance into a scene worthy of one of his musicals. Between acts, before the final curtain had fallen, he dropped to one knee and asked Jones to become his wife. She accepted, and on August 5, 1956, Jack Cassidy and Shirley Jones were married. To the theater world, they seemed like a dream pairing, two glamorous performers whose careers were rising almost as quickly as their new family. Marriage certainly didn't slow Cassidy's professional momentum. He continued appearing in major productions, including Shangri-La in 1956 and Wonderful Town in 1958, carrying his talents from Broadway to international stages such as the Brussels World's Fair. Everywhere he went, the polished baritone and effortless charisma followed. Meanwhile, the Cassidy household was becoming a show business dynasty. In 1958, Jack and Shirley welcomed their first son together, Shaun Cassidy. Years later, Shaun would become a massive teen idol in his own right, attracting the kind of screaming young audience even his famous father had never experienced. 4 years later came Patrick Cassidy, born while Jones was filming The Music Man. Even before his birth, Patrick seemed determined to participate in the family business, reportedly kicking hard enough during one of his mother's scenes that her co-star felt it through an embrace. From the outside, the Cassidy family looked almost impossibly wholesome. Jack had a celebrated Broadway career, a beautiful movie star wife, and children seemingly destined to continue the family's theatrical legacy. And his ambitions were no longer limited to live theater. In 1962, Cassidy lent his distinctive voice to Bob Cratchit in Mr. Magoo's Christmas Carol. The production became notable as the first animated Christmas special created specifically for television, giving Cassidy another place in entertainment history. His warm baritone fit the character perfectly, bringing Broadway-style emotion into millions of American living rooms. But no matter how many new mediums he explored, the stage remained the place where Jack Cassidy commanded the most attention. In 1963, he reached one of the defining moments of his career with She Loves Me. Playing the charming but slippery Stephen Codley, Cassidy turned what might have been a supporting character into one of the production's most memorable figures. His combination of elegance, humor, and calculated arrogance proved irresistible. The performance brought him the ultimate Broadway recognition. Cassidy won the Tony Award, while the show's cast recording also earned Grammy recognition in 1964. After years of climbing from chorus parts to increasingly important roles, he had officially entered Broadway's elite. By the early 1960s, Jack Cassidy seemed to have everything a performer could possibly want. He had major awards, critical respect, an accomplished wife, a growing family, and children who already seemed touched by the same show business magic that had driven him since adolescence. His life looked almost perfectly scripted. A struggling boy from Queens works his way onto Broadway, becomes a leading man, marries a star, raises a famous family, wins prestigious awards, and eventually takes his place among the legends of the American stage. But Jack Cassidy understood better than most that theater was built on illusion. The audience only saw what happened beneath the lights. And once those lights went dark, Cassidy was becoming a very different man. Professionally, however, his momentum continued. In 1964, he appeared in Fade Out, Fade In, playing the flamboyant Byron Prong. Once again, his theatrical confidence, musical ability, and razor-sharp comic instincts made him difficult to ignore. The performance eventually brought him another Tony nomination, reinforcing the impression that Cassidy could dominate almost any production he entered. Then he discovered that being charming wasn't nearly as much fun as being dangerous. In 1966, Cassidy played Max Menken in It's a Bird. It's a Plane. It's Superman. The character was jealous, manipulative, and increasingly consumed by resentment towards Superman. Cassidy embraced every unpleasant quality, delivering such an entertaining villain that audiences couldn't look away. Apparently, Jack Cassidy was exceptionally good at being bad. His performance earned him yet another Tony nomination for Best Leading Actor in a Musical. By this point, Broadway could barely contain him. After years of dominating the stage, Cassidy began shifting more of his attention toward television. The transition led him to the CBS sitcom He and She, where he played Oscar North, an absurdly self-important actor whose ego was matched only by his incompetence. The role was almost a parody of the grand leading men Cassidy had spent years portraying. He played Oscar with such gleeful arrogance that the television industry quickly noticed. Cassidy earned an Emmy nomination, proving that his larger-than-life personality worked just as well in front of a camera as it did beneath Broadway's lights. His career had reached another peak. But the qualities that made Jack Cassidy so magnetic on stage, his confidence, intensity, ego, and unpredictability, were becoming increasingly difficult to separate from the man himself. And away from the applause, the performance was beginning to crack. Hollywood eventually came calling, and Jack Cassidy proved that his larger-than-life presence worked just as well on camera as it did beneath the Broadway lights. By the beginning of the 1970s, he was appearing regularly on television and steadily building a reputation for playing men who were charming, intelligent, and often just a little dangerous. One of his strongest dramatic performances came in the Andersonville trial. Cassidy showed audiences that he could do far more than sing, dance, and deliver witty one-liners. His work earned him an Emmy nomination and helped establish him as one of those rare Broadway performers capable of crossing into serious television drama without losing any of his theatrical magnetism. Then came a role that would become one of the most memorable television appearances of his career. Cassidy guest starred in Columbo as Ken Franklin in the episode Murder by the Book. Franklin was sophisticated, calculating, and disturbingly self-assured, the kind of character Cassidy seemed born to play. Behind the camera was a remarkably young director named Steven Spielberg, still years away from becoming one of Hollywood's biggest filmmakers. The combination worked beautifully. Cassidy understood how to make arrogance entertaining. A raised eyebrow, a carefully timed smile, or a slight change in posture could instantly turn his characters from charming to sinister. Rather than trying to hide their enormous egos, he made those egos the most entertaining part of them. It became his specialty. Throughout the 1970s, Cassidy developed a screen persona that was almost impossible to imitate: polished, urbane, confident, theatrical, and just smug enough to make audiences wonder whether they should admire him or distrust him. Usually, the answer was both. That distinctive presence eventually helped him land the role of legendary actor John Barrymore in the 1976 film W.C. Fields and Me. By then, casting directors knew exactly what Jack Cassidy could provide. He didn't simply enter a scene. He seemed to take possession of it. Few television appearances demonstrated the talent better than his guest role on The Mary Tyler Moore Show. Cassidy played Hal Baxter, the equally self-important brother of Ted Baxter. Although he appeared for only one episode, he effortlessly matched the show's established stars and nearly stole every scene he entered. Cassidy could make even a supporting role feel like a starring performance. Ironically, however, he had once been offered something much bigger. The character of Ted Baxter had reportedly been conceived with Cassidy in mind. The pompous television anchorman seemed almost perfectly designed for his comic talents. Yet Cassidy declined the opportunity, believing the part wasn't right for him. Ted Knight ultimately took the role and transformed it into one of television's most beloved comic characters. For Cassidy, it was one of those rare career decisions that looked considerably worse in hindsight. Still, there was another television series that understood exactly how to use him. Columbo brought Cassidy back in 1974, this time as ruthless publisher Riley Greenleaf in Publish or Perish. Once again, Cassidy played a sophisticated man hiding something ugly beneath an elegant exterior. He was exceptionally convincing. Perhaps disturbingly so. While audiences watched Jack Cassidy portray charming villains on television, something far more unsettling was beginning to happen away from the cameras. His son David Cassidy later wrote about this period in his 1994 memoir Come On, Get Happy, describing a father whose moods and behavior had become increasingly unpredictable. The confident performer audiences saw on screen was no longer the same man his family encountered behind closed doors. The real drama had moved off stage. By the mid-1970s, Cassidy was experiencing serious psychological problems. His behavior could shift dramatically, and according to accounts from those close to him, doctors eventually diagnosed him with bipolar disorder. Alcohol also complicated an already unstable situation, making his moods and actions even harder for his family to understand or control. Then came an incident that made it impossible for the people around him to pretend everything was normal. In 1974, residents of Cassidy's Los Angeles neighborhood looked outside and witnessed one of Broadway's most celebrated performers standing on his front lawn completely naked. Cassidy was calmly watering the grass. There was no stage, no costume, no punchline. To Cassidy, the scene apparently seemed entirely ordinary. To everyone watching, it was deeply disturbing. The episode became one of the clearest public signs that something was seriously wrong. Yet inside the Cassidy home, Shirley Jones had already witnessed behavior that was even stranger. On one occasion, she reportedly discovered her husband sitting quietly in a corner reading a book. He wasn't wearing anything. What made the moment particularly unsettling wasn't simply his nudity. Cassidy appeared completely relaxed, behaving as though nothing unusual was happening at all. But even that incident paled beside what Jones would witness during another apparent manic episode. Cassidy was supposed to prepare for a performance, and Jones tried to persuade him to get dressed and leave the house. Instead, he remained absorbed in his own thoughts. Then he calmly looked at her and said something she would never forget. He told her that he now knew he was Christ. For Jones, the statement changed everything. This was no longer merely eccentric behavior from a theatrical man with an oversized personality. Her husband appeared to be losing his grasp on reality, and she realized that whatever was happening to Jack had moved far beyond anything she could manage by herself. By late 1974, the situation had reached a breaking point. Following another disturbing episode, Cassidy was admitted to a psychiatric facility, where he remained for 2 days. The man who had spent decades mastering every movement, expression, and line on stage was suddenly struggling to control his own mind. And unfortunately, the crisis was far from over. Jack Cassidy would eventually return home and continue working, giving audiences the impression that the worst had passed. But behind that familiar smile, the instability remained. And the most terrifying chapter of his life had yet to begin. Only after Jack Cassidy was hospitalized did Shirley Jones fully understand what doctors believed was happening to her husband. Cassidy had been diagnosed with bipolar disorder, and for Jones, the revelation helped explain years of increasingly confusing behavior. But understanding the cause did not make living with it any easier. By then, the strain had become overwhelming. Jones had spent years watching the charismatic, controlled performer she married become increasingly unpredictable behind closed doors. There were moments when Cassidy still appeared completely himself, followed by episodes in which he seemed almost unrecognizable. Eventually, she came to the painful conclusion that she could no longer hold their marriage together. In May 1975, Jack Cassidy and Shirley Jones separated. Broadway's once glamorous golden couple was finished. For Cassidy, the divorce marked the beginning of an increasingly lonely chapter. His personal life was collapsing, but professionally he refused to slow down. If anything, work seemed to offer him one of the few remaining places where everything still made sense. And remarkably, he continued delivering some of his strongest performances. Shortly after the marriage ended, Cassidy appeared opposite Clint Eastwood in the 1975 thriller The Eiger Sanction. He played Miles Mellowug, a smooth, slippery informer whose charm concealed motives that were impossible to trust. It was precisely the sort of character Cassidy had perfected. Elegant on the surface, dangerous underneath, and carrying far more secrets than anyone around him realized. Then, in 1976, Cassidy returned once again to one of the television series that had made perfect use of his darker side. Columbo brought him back for a third appearance, this time in Now You See Him. Cassidy played the great Santini, a celebrated magician whose polished stage act concealed something far more sinister. Once again, he was the villain. And once again, audiences loved him for it. Cassidy's third appearance placed him among the relatively small group of actors invited back to play different murderers on the series. Few performers could make arrogance, menace, and sophistication blend together so effortlessly. Yet even while Cassidy's characters were hiding secrets on screen, the man playing them was keeping parts of his own private life hidden as well. Years after Jack's death, his son David Cassidy made a deeply personal revelation about his father. David wrote that Jack was bisexual, something that apparently came as a surprise to members of the family even though rumors about Cassidy's relationships had circulated within show business circles for years. The story became even more complicated decades later. In her 2013 memoir, Shirley Jones also discussed Cassidy's relationships outside their marriage. According to Jones, her husband had affairs with both women and men. Among the most striking claims was that Cassidy had once been romantically involved with legendary composer Cole Porter, the same Broadway giant whose music had been connected to Jack's career when he was still a teenager. Porter was decades older than Cassidy. For years, such stories had largely remained backstage whispers. Now, Cassidy's own family was bringing them into public view. Jones later spoke openly about this side of her former husband, explaining that Cassidy had relationships with men but also remained strongly attracted to women. His personal life, like so much else about him, resisted simple explanations. Jack Cassidy was full of contradictions. He could be deeply charming and painfully difficult. Confident yet emotionally unstable. A devoted performer who sometimes seemed unable to manage his own life. And by the end of 1976, many of the people who had once shared that life with him were no longer there. After his divorce from Jones, Cassidy lived alone in a sprawling Hollywood penthouse occupying the entire top floor of his apartment building. Balconies surrounded the residence, offering sweeping views over the city where he had spent years building his fame. From above, Hollywood must have looked magnificent. Inside, however, Cassidy was increasingly isolated. On December 11, 1976, he called Shirley Jones. Cassidy invited his former wife to come over for drinks. Exactly what he wanted that evening remains uncertain. Perhaps he wanted company. Perhaps he wanted to talk. Perhaps it was simply another casual invitation between two people whose lives had remained connected long after their marriage ended. Jones declined. At the time, there was no reason to believe the decision mattered. Later, it would become impossible for her to forget. Cassidy went out alone that evening. He ate dinner at an Italian restaurant and then moved through several bars in West Hollywood. Alcohol had long complicated his emotional struggles, and by the time he finally returned to his penthouse, he had reportedly been drinking heavily. The apartment was quiet. No wife. No children. No audience. Just Jack Cassidy and the city lights outside his windows. No one watching him that night could have known that the celebrated Broadway star had only hours left to live. After returning home, Cassidy settled onto his couch. At some point, he lit a cigarette. It was an ordinary gesture, something he had probably done countless times before. But on this particular night, inside that Hollywood penthouse, one small flame was about to turn Jack Cassidy's already turbulent story into something horrifying. And by sunrise, almost everything would be gone. That cigarette may have been intended to calm Jack Cassidy down after a long night, but combined with alcohol and exhaustion, it became deadly. At some point, Cassidy fell asleep on the couch. The cigarette slipped from his hand, landing where one tiny ember could quietly begin doing unimaginable damage. The sofa caught fire. Then the flames spread. Within minutes, Cassidy's Hollywood penthouse was filling with smoke and heat. By the early hours of December 12, 1976, the apartment had become an inferno, with fire tearing through the rooms and threatening everyone else inside the building. Deputy Sheriff John DeMatteo spotted the blaze and immediately began helping evacuate residents. One by one, people escaped to safety. But one resident could not be located: Jack Cassidy. Firefighters eventually discovered a body close to the apartment's doorway. It had been so badly burned that immediate identification was impossible. There was still one small reason for Cassidy's family to hope the body wasn't his. His car was gone. Cassidy had reportedly talked about traveling to Palm Springs, so for a brief period, friends and relatives clung to the possibility that he had left Los Angeles before the fire began. Maybe Jack had escaped. Maybe the body belonged to someone else. That hope disappeared when investigators discovered the truth about the missing vehicle. A friend had borrowed Cassidy's car. Suddenly, the explanation everyone desperately wanted to believe vanished. The remains were taken to the coroner, where authorities began the difficult process of determining who had died inside the apartment. Because the body had been burned beyond visual recognition, investigators had to rely on other evidence. Dental records provided the answer. So did a distinctive piece of jewelry found with the remains, a gold signet ring engraved with the Cassidy family crest. There was no longer any uncertainty. The victim was Jack Cassidy. He was only 49 years old. The man who had spent more than 3 decades performing under Broadway lights, television lights, and Hollywood spotlights had died alone inside his own apartment, only feet from the doorway. There would be no final curtain call. No applause. No encore. Cassidy's remaining remains were cremated, and his family later scattered his ashes over the Pacific Ocean. Yet while his life had ended suddenly and violently, his influence on American entertainment was far from finished. The Cassidy name continued. His eldest son David had already become one of the defining teen idols of the 1970s through the Partridge Family. Shaun Cassidy would follow with his own enormous music and television career, while Patrick Cassidy eventually built a respected career as an actor and stage performer. In different ways, each carried part of Jack Cassidy's theatrical inheritance forward. That legacy made his story even more complicated. To audiences, Jack had been the dazzling Broadway performer with the magnificent voice, impeccable timing, and almost effortless arrogance. To his children, he was something much harder to understand, a brilliant but unpredictable father whose private struggles and secrets would only become fully visible after his death. They inherited his talent. But they also inherited unanswered questions. Jack Cassidy's life had contained almost everything one might expect from a Broadway drama: poverty, ambition, romance, betrayal, fame, awards, family conflict, hidden relationships, psychological turmoil, and finally an ending so tragic that it seemed almost impossible to script. Yet reducing him to the manner of his death would miss what made his story remarkable. Cassidy rose from a working-class childhood in Queens to become one of Broadway's most distinctive performers. He won a Tony, earned multiple major nominations, moved successfully into television and film, and developed a style so recognizable that even a brief guest appearance could dominate an entire episode. He could be charming and infuriating, elegant and reckless, funny one moment and frighteningly unpredictable the next. The same qualities that made him magnetic also made his private life extraordinarily complicated. And perhaps the contradiction is why Jack Cassidy remains so fascinating decades later. His life never fit neatly into the polished image audiences saw from their seats. Behind every confident smile was another layer. Behind every performance was another secret. And behind the celebrated entertainer was a man fighting battles almost no one in the audience could see. Jack Cassidy never had the opportunity to deliver a final bow, but he left something more lasting behind: an entertainment dynasty, unforgettable performances, and a story that remains as dramatic as anything he ever performed on stage. His final chapter ended in flames. But the Cassidy name continued shining long after the fire went out. If you enjoyed this story, give the video a like and subscribe for more incredible journeys through Hollywood's most fascinating lives. And tell us in the comments which legendary star you would like to see covered next.